Hi everyone, it's the EnglishSimmer here, and this video is brought to you through the EA Creator Network. It is also marked as an ad, as I did receive early access to the brand new expansion, Lovestruck, for a certain time period. We now do not have that on our account. I've had a few days to kind of dissect, think about my time with the pack. I am going to be picking this up with my own money once it obviously comes out, so that I can continue to make videos with the expansion. But I wanted to sit down today, kind of discuss my thoughts behind mostly the gameplay, because honestly, people are hoping it adds on to gameplay an awful lot, and that's also personally for me where my thoughts kind of lie when it comes to this expansion. So usually I title these, "Can we replay The Sims 4 blank?" This is kind of my thoughts and opinions, whereas the other early access videos are all just kind of things that are included and going over every section of the new pack. I want to say my overarching thought behind this whole expansion was it's sort of hindered by itself and also The Sims 4 limitations. I feel like they could have done a lot more with a romance inspired pack if The Sims 4 just allowed us to do more within the game anyway. Do I think that we can replay this pack? Yes, obviously. A lot of us have Sims who romance one another. We obviously all kind of play around with those romantic relationships at some point. However, I will say it does lack a certain depth that I was really wanting to see. I personally think after waiting 10 years for romance and kind of romantic relationships to become deeper in The Sims 4, I was slightly disappointed by this pack. Now, a fair bit of this disappointment actually comes from the systems of this pack. Some of them I personally think should be in base game, and this is kind of going into the same sort of grouping as an expansion as Growing Together did, where I felt like half of the stuff for infants and milestones should have been part of base game. They feel like core moments, and it felt like the community would really be missing out on those things. Romantic attraction, turn on and turn offs are kind of in that same element, and I think they actually could have done more with them if they were potentially introduced in base game. Updating dates as well. I don't know why a new date system was included in this expansion when it feels like they could have just given that to us as a base game update to the pre-existing dating system, and then they could have given us more details and actual more gameplay instead of just these really hefty systems in the expansion to make it actually feel like you were getting new things. One, it doesn't really change the activities. It doesn't really change how dates work that much. You can choose certain activities, but really you could just go on a date and do those activities anyway, because this pack doesn't introduce any new locations. It doesn't really add any new activities other than the picnic blanket. And then also the date system doesn't include some activities that I personally think it should. That might change once I get my hands on this pack with all the other packs installed. I don't think it will change much because some of them were already listed, even though they were tied to for example seasons or cats and dogs. And even though the dates have different names, they all work exactly the same way. You just get a couple of new interactions, do this thing and then talk about said thing. Obviously, the newest part of it is the fact that you can now manage dates. So you can ask a date how the date is going, which kind of just gives you a tutorial on saying, hey, you need to do more of these activities to actually make your date happy. You can choose to extend it, or you can choose to end it early, or just end it nicely. And then there's also a couple of new rewards that you can get. I'm glad that we can now have the true lesbian experience of just having an all day and night first date. Yes, give me that realism. I think because they focus so much on those systems, it kind of took away from the new actual content that was included in this pack, that wasn't just leaning on something that we already had in the game, those new lot types or different places where you could actually go on dates or different actual activities to do on dates. Where is the pool table? A lot of the new systems to me felt like they were integrating, but then they were also cancelling each other out, because there's so many different systems at play. Attraction is obviously the one that depends on like turn-ons and turn-offs. It's what basically tells the game like, hey, are these sims compatible? Are they going to get along with each other? And then that plays a role in how they interact with each other romantically. However, I personally tested this. I made two couples. One of them I made very unattracted to each other, and then the other I made very attractive. They were an absolute Tesco value version of the pancakes. When sims are attracted to each other, it means that their romantic relationship, so the traditional like pink romance bar that we're used to seeing, actually happens a lot faster. You only need to do a couple of interactions to actually have that romance bar appear, and that is because when you do these interactions, when your sims are attracted to each other, the romance actually goes up at an accelerated rate. So obviously you have bigger increments. With the attracted sims, I was actually able to start playing at 8 a.m. and by 11:30 a.m. the sims had woohooed. They had also entered a romantic relationship and they had also proposed. It was very easy to get them to start their romance bar. And then with the unattracted sims, I noticed that I definitely had to work on their friendship a lot more, and that's kind of what dictates attraction and how the romance bar works. If a sim is unattracted to someone else, they won't actually accept their advances quite that easily. They'll actually just be like, no thank you very much. And then you have to get their friendship up quite a lot to then actually kickstart the romance bar, and that's when they'll actually start to gain that romance bar. It took a lot longer to get that bar to appear. It also took a lot longer in turn to actually have them enter a romantic relationship, woohoo, and propose. I was still able to do it in one day. It just took way more hours because obviously it was slower increments, because if you're unattracted, then you just have to do more romantic interactions and it doesn't increase quite as much after each romantic interaction. So friendship definitely has a knock-on effect in that, which is quite realistic. They were actually still easily able to flirt once we kind of got over that little speed hump at the beginning. I personally think that could have been made a lot better if there was a cooldown. So say if you actually like flirted with someone and they didn't accept it and they said that they weren't attracted to you, I kind of wish they made it even more difficult to then try and get over that. Obviously I was doing this at a way accelerated rate because I was trying to play around with it, but it didn't feel like it was changing the way in which I romance. Like attraction didn't really personally to me feel like it made that much of a difference, because I was like, well, I've already decided that I want these sims to get together, so let me just like keep spamming romance, and eventually it got to the point. This personally could have been helpful for me if they had introduced that cooldown system. They had introduced furious states that we know and love from The Sims 2. It's something that I want so desperately within the game. I feel like they could do it with sentiments. And basically, if you had just been like, I'm going through an ick period where I've said to you, I'm not attracted to you, I've actually turned down your flirtation, you're still trying to flirt with me, and then that maybe kickstarted a little sentiment, a little furious state where you were just frozen out. You couldn't actually continue to flirt with them. It came up with, you have been denied, give it like 2 or 3 days, let a sim cool off, get over it, and then you can continue to try and romance. I don't think every simmer would be on board with that. I don't think everyone would love that. But to me personally, I think if you're not just focusing on the like autonomous interactions that your sims are doing and you're still like dictating those moments of your sim's life, attraction isn't really gonna have an effect on how you romance. Interestingly enough, myself and another plumber were actually chatting over on Twitter before, and I think this was important to include when it came to this, because in the live stream we actually saw two sims who were unattracted to each other, but the one who was unattracted to the sim still continued to flirt, still continued to do romantic interactions. And that was kind of a red flag to people, because it was like, autonomously, shouldn't a sim who's unattracted like not want to do romantic interactions? Like, I think it's fair and valid, even if they are unattracted to each other, to still be able to get a romance out of it at the end of the day. I think that's important for us as simmers when it comes to storytelling. However, I would like it if it was harder. I would like it if there were more consequence. And Puck actually ran a whole experiment. I'll actually link the beginning of this like Twitter thread down below so you can go check it out yourself. And even though Bella was was unattracted to Don, autonomously she flirted with him first, and then that made them get like a steamy dynamic, and their romance did actually go up to a point, even autonomously. And then Puck actually tweeted out, I think that's the key. As long as you have like a strong friendship foundation, or even just like any sort of friendship level, even if you are unattracted to a sim, that sim will still autonomously flirt. And that seems to be what actually unlocks it when it comes to autonomy. But I personally feel like a lot of simmers play one with autonomy off, and also two, even if we do have autonomy on, we're not always just relying on autonomy to tell our stories. So I personally would have just loved to see this be a little bit harder. I would have loved to see some consequence to actually continuously romancing someone even though they weren't attracted to you. And then tying that into the other systems, obviously if you start to work on your romance skill, your romantic interactions actually succeed a lot better than someone without the romance skill. If you are just doing generic romantic interactions, your romance skill will go up. Even if you have a sim who is romantically reserved or unflirty, at some point it is very, very likely that they will develop the romance skill because it works like charisma. So that already is also adding a little buff to the romantic relationship bar because they're more likely to succeed. Then if you have a dynamic, the dynamics kind of have the most effect on like autonomy and how sims will interact with each other. For example, if they're strained or unpredictable, then they're likely to argue or do more mean interactions, which in turn has a negative effect on both the romantic relationship bar and the friendship bar. However, if you have steamy or wholesome, it's more likely that that is going to increase your bar. So that's already kind of having an effect alongside attraction, but then they're already like slightly cancelling each other out. And then if you throw satisfaction into that, if you have two sims who are very satisfied in their romantic relationship, your relationship bar increases over time without you actually even doing anything. And you can't really tell from like a player perspective what is actually having an effect because they're all kind of like fighting. The best way I describe it is it's like the emotion system. Unless you're paying so much attention to it and you're doing experiments where you're writing down and like looking at all the percentages, it's going to be really hard, I personally feel, for the average player to actually find out what is having an effect and where it's having an effect. I mean, even when it comes to attraction, once you reach level 6 in the romance skill, you can scan the room, which basically allows your sim to send out a pulse to the room, and then the sims that they are attracted to get a little like love heart above their head. And I think that is the biggest role that attraction, personally for me, is going to play, because romancing a sim was already easy. You just had to do a couple of friendship interactions, then you flirt, then you compliment her appearance until you have a solid like romance bar. So the biggest thing for me personally is attraction. When you do scan that room, a sim popping up that you're like, oh, my sim is attracted to them, that's probably a good thing, let's go for them. However, I did also notice a weird thing where even if my sim interacted with a sim that they were attracted to after scanning the room, if I went onto their profile, usually talking to them actually like kickstarts the attraction, and it will either say like attracted or very attractive or the opposite for unattracted. Whereas this time around it was just saying fine. So is that just like also measuring the base level of like a fine attraction? In which case I don't think that they should be considered an attractive sim because it's just fine and that's just the baseline. So yes, attraction can dictate who you romance if you want it to. So I do feel as if it can steer you in how to play your romance. I just don't think it changes it enough actually as a system in the programming of The Sims. I personally think the romance skill just in general also kind of hinders this pack because a lot of like the new interactions are locked by leveling up in the romance skill. Like I don't want every sim that I have in the future to be good at the romance skill. Like that just doesn't seem fun. However, a lot of the new interactions that you can do, like goosing sims or scanning the room or checking someone out, they're all locked under the romance skill. Like the further you go up in the romance skill, the more new interactions to do with romance you actually unlock. unlock. I just personally feel like they should be there from the get-go. Fair and valid, giving us like a couple of things that unlock with that skill as a little like, hey, this is the reason why you've been working on the skill, enjoy these buffs. But it just feels really weird to hide so many of the new romantic interactions behind it. And then it leads on to, well, outside of these romantic systems, the other stuff that comes with the pack, yeah, it's fun. A lot of it is tied to pop-ups. For example, Sims asking if you want to like continue the date elsewhere, or if you want to extend the date, or rabbit holes such as the motel or couples counseling. They can help you as a player to steer your stories and actually how you romance other Sims. And I do feel like it feels fresh enough to do those things. I just have a concern as to how fresh those things are gonna feel in the longevity of this pack. Once you've seen those pop up like once or twice, it's like, okay, now I'm just like sick of seeing those pop-ups. Kind of like the, hey, you've got like 7 days to get married. I can't speak too much on couples counseling. I only did one session with our couples counselor. I kind of enjoyed what I saw. It was all just like completely through pop-ups, and then you as a player kind of directed where it was going. But that did mean that I could relate it to the story that I was trying to tell in that specific romance. I'm definitely gonna have to look into it a little bit further and see if like going back actually helps or hinders a relationship, to see if that actually does have any effect on the gameplay. From what I played in early access, it just kind of gave me ideas and like little jumping off points, but that actually didn't really change like how my Sims were feeling about each other. And that's another issue I have with pop-ups. They are kind of a stand-in. Like, they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting in this pack, and whilst it adds consequence, for example, if you are mean to a Sim whilst they are feeling unsatisfied in a relationship, then they can actually break up with you. If you continuously like break their romantic boundaries and cheat on them, they can also break up with you. But that is all done through pop-ups. You get one warning you like, hey, you broke their romantic boundaries. If you're not careful, they're gonna break up with you. You do it again, you get a second try. You get 3 strikes, you're out of there. It says, this Sim has broken up with you. And you can see them, like this was happening to me. Obviously, they kind of have to be on the same lot and like actually see the cheating happening. She was fuming. You could see that she was enraged. She was feeling angry. She was like stomping her foot. She was going like, ugh. And you could even hear her in like the background when I wasn't even focused on her. But at no point did she actually come up to my Sim and say those things. And it's just like, I feel that could have been so easy. They could have just had that Towny go up to my Sim and do the breakup interaction. But they chose not to do that. They just chose to do it through a notification that I had to read myself, and I just had to like infer that this is what I was being told. It also, in my personal opinion, gave me far too many warnings. I personally would love it if I didn't notice a Sim was feeling unsatisfied in a relationship, if I wasn't playing as them and I couldn't see like their profile, or I just hadn't checked their profile in a minute, which at one point I did do. I just didn't have 2 Sims interact really at all. And then finally I like opened up the profile, noticed that he was unsatisfied. So I was like, okay, let me see what unsatisfaction does. Had him come over to my lot and he was like, if you're mean to me, I'm gonna break up with you. I would have preferred it so much more if I as a player didn't know that that was gonna be the reaction. Maybe tell you like the first time you play the pack as kind of like a little tutorial, or just have that spread through the community like word of mouth, like, hey, if you do this, then this bad thing is gonna happen. But imagine my shock and surprise if I had just invited him over and then like autonomously we had been mean to him, or something had happened within my game and he was like, right, that's it, we're broken up. I would have been shocked Pikachu face. And personally to me, that's the kind of consequence I would have liked to see a little bit more. It also felt weird in like my storytelling that even when it came up with like certain notifications, for example, I had a romantically reserved Sim. She got to the point where she wanted to take things further in the relationship. So I was like, okay, cool. Like story-wise, I imagine she's gonna ask the Sim to be her partner. But then it actually came up with an interaction of like discuss moving things forward. And I was like, oh, that's cute. Let me do that interaction. So I had her do the interaction. The sim reacted in honestly what I saw as the negative way, where it was like, oh, I'm not really on the same page right now. Like, I don't really agree with that. And I was like, ooh, drama tea. But then as soon as I clicked on the sim again, I could just ask her to be my partner. So I did, thinking, oh, she's probably actually gonna like turn me down this time around because she's literally just said that she wasn't really interested in that. Boom, they were romantic partners. She accepted it like it was nothing. Again, that happened when I accidentally ended a date badly, and it was like, this was a terrible date. She despawned off the lot, obviously went home, and then 2 seconds later I could call her up and I could invite her back over to my house, and she was like, yeah, sure, and just turned up at my door. Like, that to me just isn't realistic, and I feel like this is really where the pack suffers. It suffers from how The Sims 4 just is in general. Like, those things aren't programmed into The Sims 4, and I just feel there's consequence, but it's consequence in a notification, and that's personally not what I want as a Sims player. Like, I don't just want to be told like, hey, this is gonna happen, and then don't actually see it happening. Don't see it happening with like any other Sims around me, which leads me on to Towny autonomy in general. Obviously I had those issues that I've already spoken about, and it's nice that on a date they can be like, hey, I'm really enjoying myself, like, can we extend this? Or, hey, I'd really like to take this back to your place, because again, that kind of encourages little story beats if you feel like you as a player, this is going well. However, I did notice when it came to the negative side of things, there wasn't really any repercussion. Like, if I was having a bad date, I as a player could actually say, let's force an emergency, let's pretend that someone is calling me and I have to dip on this date. But never once did that happen to a Towny that I was on a date with. Never once did they say, this date isn't really going well, like, I'm not really feeling this, goodbye. They didn't shut down any of the dates. I went on a blind date and I literally just flirted with someone right in front of her, and she was just like, I don't care. Even though we weren't progressing in our date bar like whatsoever, there wasn't any repercussion to having bad dates. Even before the breaking up, I think it would be really, really cool if you were dating a Towny or just like a sim that you weren't actually playing and things were going quite badly. Maybe you were both unsatisfied, or maybe they were really unsatisfied and you just hadn't really noticed it. Imagine if they could be like, I think we personally should go to couples counseling. They don't really seem to make any choice when it comes to your relationship other than when it's going quite well. They can ask you to go on a date if they're feeling romantic, and then obviously they can ask to like extend dates. I did see the pop-up of them saying like, hey, can we go on a date? But I didn't actually ever do it. I'm imagining though, if I said yes, it would either send me on a base game date or it would just send me to the date planning screen where I actually had to like plan it all out. I personally would prefer it if a Towny or just a sim that I wasn't playing as, because they can be in the same household as you. Imagine if they could plan it. Imagine if they just did the whole thing. It was all the brand new date system, just like depending on what they actually wanted, and you actually had to play into that. Even that would be more interesting to me than me constantly having to plan out these dates myself. But like I said, I didn't really test that. It might work that way, and if it does, I will be happily surprised by that fact. And then in turn, because it does feel like they have focused on a lot of these systems, I feel a lot of other stuff that could have personally been included in this expansion were. There weren't any different types of proposals. I'm not too sure if like Sims that you're not playing as can actually propose to you. I didn't see it happen within my game, but I only played like a Sims week, so that's not to say that it can't happen. They didn't redo the relaxing on bed. They obviously introduced the new cuddling in bed, which is all well and good. However, you can't actually do any interactions whilst you are cuddling in bed. It's just kind of a static animation that plays over and over again. You can't even chat, you can't flirt with one another. The only thing you can do is fall asleep in each other's arms, which is cute, but let me do more things. It's so unrealistic just to lie there going like, yeah. And then kiss someone's forehead and then that's it. It just plays on a loop. There's not really unrequited love, which again, I don't think they can actually do based on how The Sims 4 works. I don't think they can have two different romantic relationship bars on 2 different sims. The satisfaction thing was kind of their way of going about that, so that you can have one sim who's unsatisfied, and then obviously you can have a sim who's very satisfied depending on how they actually like interact romantically with one another. There isn't speed dating, there isn't catfishing, which was just such a missed opportunity for me. I don't know why you can't lie about yourself on the dating app. Whilst the other little things are quite fun, I just don't think it adds the depth that I personally wanted for a romance pack, and I think that's fine. I also don't think everyone's going to agree with me. I think some people could get their hands on this expansion pack and be like, this is great. It actually feels like realistic. I enjoy it, which is absolutely fine. I'm not here to dictate what people can or can't think about this pack. This is all just like my personal preference from the short time, and I will clarify, I did only play this for a short time. We did have a little bit of time to play with it. It's just with my schedule, it didn't work out that well. So I obviously tried to play with everything in like the amount of time that I had, but this is definitely one of those packs where you kind of have to explore it over a period of time to get into those intricacies of the system, if there are intricacies of the system. At the end of the day, do I think this is replayable? Yeah, obviously. Like, if you are a sim who has romantic relationships, obviously at some point, if you get your hands on Lovestruck, you're gonna play it with like these systems. Are you gonna notice them that much? Who knows? I think that truly depends on like how you play the game, and also like what you're trying to push it to get to. I personally don't think it's the strongest expansion. I personally don't think it was the romantic expansion pack that I was wanting. There are some elements that I really, really like. For example, I love dynamics. I love them in Growing Together. I really, really like them in this expansion. I love how they kind of give you different ways for your sims to interact. Even though they love each other, they can get on each other's nerves at times and just like consistently argue. I love how it plays with autonomy, but you can still have like a strong relationship even if you are unpredictable or strained. There's just also personally a lot that I would have changed. There are a lot of things that I personally would have put into base game and then focused on the pack elsewhere, and I still feel like I want more for romantic relationships, which I personally don't think I should be feeling after the release of an expansion that focuses on romantic relationships. But I would love to hear your thoughts about this. I obviously do have all my other early access videos where I go over Create a Sim. I also go over the world in Townies and gameplay. Obviously, gameplay pertains the most to like this video. I just wanted a place to kind of give all my thoughts and kind of feedback and critiques about this pack, because I was disappointed, and I think that's okay to say. I think I had bigger expectations for a romantic pack, especially based on how much I love Growing Together. I saw that we were getting those complicated relationships that we have within families and then applied those to romantic relationships, but to me personally, Lovestruck just does not feel as strong of an expansion as Growing Together does. I don't know what that is. I think it is still the lack of feeling of consequence, the kind of fact that you can still just really play romances the way that we've always been able to. It just has some like new funky labels now. This weekend I am going to have my cross compatibility video up. That's basically where I play this new pack, which I will be purchasing Thursday evening once it comes out, and then play it with all the other packs that I have installed to see how well or how not well it works with each other. If there's anything specific that you want to know, I know so many of you want to know how the picnic basket works with the blanket. I'm going to be exploring all of that. So if you have anything that you want to ask about cross compatibility, leave it in the comments below or over on my community page post about cross compatibility. I appreciate you all so much for listening to my thoughts and rambling, and I will speak to you all in my next one. Bye now.